Naomi got to the hospital too fast, so fast that she hated herself for the haste. She justified it in the cold language of her legal profession. A robbery victim needed someone who understood procedure, who understood how a statement could be twisted, who understood how a careless sentence could turn into a noose. Yet beneath that logic lay an emotion she could barely name, a shard of youth-bound memory with Haley, a former friendship that once made Naomi believe some people entered your life not to wound you. And beneath that, darker and sharper, was another layer entirely. Haley was not only an old friend, she was her father's wife. An exclamation point driven straight into the family order Naomi had once assumed was untouchable. Naomi's very presence here felt like a compromise, as if she were opening the door for someone who had walked into her home without asking permission. She watched Haley on the bed, bruises arranged like an indictment, and Naomi couldn't find a place to set her anger at the faceless thief. Anger at Haley for turning herself into the center of everything. Anger at her father for allowing Haley's existence to become a reality that could not be denied. Anger at Naomi herself because some part of her still wanted to believe Haley was truly afraid. The hospital was cold, but not because of the air conditioning or the sterile corridors. The cold lived in the way Haley looked at Naomi like a lifeline. And in that instant, Naomi understood that every question she asked today would not be merely a lawyer's question, but the question of a daughter being dragged into an adult power game. She hated that game, and she hated it even more when she realized she had stepped one foot onto the board before she even knew the rules. Bill appeared like a shadow shaped into protection. He walked straight into the room, his eyes locking on Haley first, then shifting to Naomi as if checking who stood too close to his story. Naomi read it immediately. This was not only the whirring of a husband, but the reflex of a man accustomed to controlling damage, accustomed to shutting doors before wine could blow secrets loose. Bill spoke little, yet his silence carried more than words, a sign he was compressing something dangerous inside his chest. Naomi saw his fist clench, saw the tightness in his jaw, and she understood Bill was angry, though she couldn't tell whether he was angry because Haley had been hurt, or because an incident had shaken the foundation of the house he was building. Haley told the robbery in a trembling voice, leaning hard on fear, on the moment a figure surged out of darkness, on the feeling of being stripped of control. Naomi listened and began recording like a machine. Time, place, route, lighting, footsteps, sounds, what was taken. And the longer she listened, the more her anger transformed into a colder, more dangerous thing, because Haley's story was too smooth, too perfectly designed to touch mercy. Naomi had met people who narrated pain in order to steer others. Her profession made it impossible to relax. Her personal history made it even more impossible. She searched Haley's eyes for truth, but Haley's were the kind of eyes that could cry while watching the other person's reaction, that could be fragile and calculating at the same time. Naomi didn't want to believe that. Naomi hated herself for thinking it. What trapped Naomi was not whether Haley deserved sympathy, but the question of whether Haley needed to become a victim. If this were just petty theft, everything would be simple. But the way Bill arrived too quickly, the way Haley held her story like armor, and the way the hospital suddenly felt like a stage made Naomi smell the scaffolding of a plot being built like scenery. Haley did not clearly say what had been stolen the first time she told it. That was a subtle evasion. Someone genuinely panicked usually clung to material details as proof the event happened. Someone using an event as a tool often delays those details to keep control of the emotional tempo. Naomi asked again, gently but sharp. Haley said her phone, then her wallet, then a few miscellaneous papers. Naomi heard the word papers like metal clinking against metal. If they were just papers, why stress them? And if they were papers, whose life did they touch? Naomi didn't need to look at Bill to know he was thinking the same thing. The difference between them was this: Naomi followed logic to find truth. Bill followed instinct to keep the story safe. Bill suddenly wanted Naomi to stay, wanted Naomi to handle everything by procedure, but Naomi felt the underside of that offer, the more legitimate people involved. The thicker the protective shell around the narrative. The more process, the fewer emotional questions. Haley was pulling Naomi closer, but Bill was pulling her closer to each with a different motive, and Naomi was the rope that could tie them tight or strangle one of them. While Naomi was being drawn into a whirlpool of pity and suspicion, in another corner of town Lynette felt the walls around her shifting. She was used to surviving on the confidence of someone who knew how to slither, who knew how to smile just enough to look harmless, but today that smile did nothing. Someone was backing Lynette into a corner, and the sensation made her furious in the way a manipulator rages when her grip is taken away. Lynette knew she was being watched from multiple angles. Haley had begun to keep her distance, exactly as Bill had warned. Yet that distance did not feel like a clean cut, it felt like a shielding gesture, as if Haley were stepping back so that when everything exploded, Lynette would be left outside the safe perimeter. Lynette hated Haley for that, but Lynette also feared Haley because Haley was the kind of woman who could turn betrayal into an innocent, tear-strict face, and Lynette could not. If a pawn had to be sacrificed, Lynette understood perfectly who would be pushed forward first. The first confrontation hit Lynette like a fist in the collar. Randy showed up wearing the look of a man sick of playing a supporting role. He no longer spoke in the cautious circles of someone operating in gray territory. Today, Randy looked like someone ready to flip the whole board if he didn't get his share. His anger wasn't only about money, it was about being treated like a tool. He had done dirty work, run errands that didn't have names, stood in places he never should have stood, and in return he'd gotten silence, delay, and a wall being built between him and the payoff. Randy stared at Lynette like she was holding the key to a vault and refusing to turn it. Lynette tried to keep her voice level, but inside her panic rose. She knew Randy could destroy everything if he wanted. Randy didn't have morals, but he had something more dangerous than morals: pride. When pride is humiliated, people will set themselves on fire just to burn everyone else down with them. Randy hinted that a piece had vanished, that there was evidence that should have stayed put, and Lynette immediately understood he meant something connected to Haley. So the robbery wasn't simple anymore. It was a move, an invisible hand reaching into Haley's bag to take what needed taking or to create a reason for what had already disappeared. And if Lynette didn't even know exactly what that thing was, that was worse, because in every scheme, the person kept in the dark is the first one sold. The second confrontation came faster than Lynette expected, and it wasn't only professional. Bill stepped into Lynette's world with the gaze of a man who could smell grime on someone else's clothes. He didn't need proof yet. He needed a reaction. Bill was a lawyer, yes, but he was also a husband, and the two roles were tearing at each other. He suspected Lynette on professional instinct, sure. But deeper than that, he suspected her because of a very male fear, the fear that Lynette knew something about Haley that he did not want to know. He had warned Haley to stay away from Lynette as a way of building fences, but perhaps also as a way of sealing mouths. Lynette looked at Bill and understood she was facing a different kind of power than Randy's: legal power, the power that could turn suspicion into an investigation, an error into an accusation. Lynette wanted to sneer at Bill for the hypocrisy because he looked at her like she was rotten but refused to look at his own wife with the same eyes. But Lynette didn't dare. She knew Bill might not look at Haley because love blinded him, or because he was choosing not to see in order to keep his marriage standing. Either way, that blindness made Lynette the trash bin for every doubt. Bill asked about the papers Haley had delivered, asked about the reasons for contact, asked about the meetings. Lynette answered smoothly, but the smoother she sounded, the more suspicious she became. And in the silence between question and response, Lynette could feel it clearly: Bill wasn't only investigating her, he was investigating himself. Because every question about Lynette was a question he was afraid to ask Haley. Back at the hospital, Naomi began to notice small fractures in Haley's story. Not the kind of cracks that could convict, but the kind that made the listener uneasy. Haley told Bill one version with fear and fragility at the center. When she turned to Naomi, she unconsciously added legal details, as if nudging Naomi to record things in a useful direction. Naomi recognized it, and something inside her flared, but it flared in silence. She was angry because Haley was using her. Angry because Bill seemed to be letting Haley use him. Angry because her father was somewhere outside this circle, unaware his wife was pulling his daughter into a fight. And then Naomi wondered, what if her father didn't know and Naomi's quick rival wasn't her own choice at all, but the result of someone summoning her to serve as witness, shield, legal stamp? If Haley had called, it was manipulation. If Bill had called, it was control. If a third party had called, Naomi had been placed as a pawn from the start. Any possibility made Naomi nauseated because it meant even compassion could be directed like a spotlight. Haley looked at Naomi with an expression that was both pleading and challenging, as though testing whether Naomi's coldness had melted yet. Naomi felt a painful truth. She could soften because of their old friendship, but she could also soften because she sensed Haley truly was afraid, not afraid of bruises, but of secrets. Not afraid of a thief, but of what had been taken or what needed to be pretended taken. Naomi understood that people who live by deception don't fear being had, they fear being exposed. And in that moment, Naomi had to make a hard decision, either step back to protect herself from the filth of this story, or step deeper to lift the cloth with her own hands. Both choices were a form of betrayal, betraying her family if she investigated her father's wife, betraying herself if she stayed silent and allowed herself to be used. While Naomi hovered between two shores, pressure forced Lynette into pure survival instinct. Randy was ready to detonate, Bill was tightening his control, and Haley, the ally who should have stood beside her, was building distance to save herself. Lynette began to consider the only kind of counterattack someone like her had, dragging someone else down. Lynette knew details Bill didn't want to hear. Lynette knew how to plant a fragment of information in the right place to make Naomi doubt Haley even more, or to force Bill into confronting his wife. But if Lynette did it, she would be signing her own death warrant with Haley. If she didn't, Randy might be the one to talk first. Lynette was trapped between two deaths, dying by abandonment or dying by betrayal. Anger made Lynette breathe too fast, and desperation made her start calculating in a cruel way. If Haley needed to be a victim, then Lynette would make Haley pay for the performance. Fairmont Crest had always been thick with quiet wars, but today everything felt as if it were sliding from shadows into daylight. A robbery that should have been small became a door opening onto a network of motives. Haley needed an emotional shield to cover a secret about to rupture. Bill needed to keep the story within his grip to protect his marriage and reputation. Naomi was pulled in because she was both lawyer and daughter, meaning she had both tools and feelings that could be exploited. Lynette and Randy stood at the bottom level of the scheme, where whoever was left behind would be crushed. And at the center of it all, the real question was no longer who robbed Haley, but who is directing Haley's robbery. Naomi stared again at the bruise on Haley's hand, and suddenly it looked less like an injury and more like a seal, as if someone had stamped the story so everyone would believe it. And Bill, somewhere else, was watching Lynette with the eyes of a man about to do the thing he didn't want to do, use the law as a weapon against people he once believed he could manage. Lynette was plotting escape by turning someone else into a sacrifice. Randy was waiting for the signal to overturn the table. And Haley, though she lay still, was the axis. Everything revolved around not through strength, but through the art of making herself the center of mercy and fear. Naomi understood that if she softened today, she would be pulled deeper tomorrow. But if she stayed cold today, she might push Haley into the dark corner where a woman backed against the wall would do anything to survive. And that thought made Naomi shiver, because she no longer knew which of them would be the most dangerous once the masks began to fall.